Good afternoon, everyone. We've got a few people coming in. We'll give it just another minute, and then we'll jump into the topic. All right, well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining our June 26th CRAVE event brought to you by Cornet New England. For those of you who haven't joined these sessions before, these virtual roundtables as a response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and really creatively thinking through how we can connect and talk about timely topics. So this is brought to you by Real Advantage and our Education Committee, and is open to all Cornet members. Topics vary from remote working to providing a safe work environment, supply chain, changes in the workplace, construction, legal, ergonomics, and technology. These sessions are being conducted in lieu of and similar to the Real Advantage workshops and education events. Because of the criticality of the information exchanged, the corporate partners and founding circle members who fund Real Advantage have agreed to make these sessions open to all members. Once the COVID-19 crisis is passed and business as usual begins, and we all hope that's sooner rather than later, we'll return to stated levels of participation for corporate partners and founding circle members. Just get to the next slide here. We have a full slate of upcoming virtual events, 2 events in July, one of which is a virtual tour, which I think could be the future of things to come. So please check our website and your Monday morning chapter newsletter to register for those and look for other upcoming events. As always, you can engage with us on social media and help share the Cornet New England story through Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And we do want to thank you to all our sponsors for their generous support of the chapter. Without their support, we would not be able to provide our members with valuable content such as today's presentation. So thank you to our corporate sponsors, our platinum sponsors, and last but not least, our gold and silver partners. Before we dive in, please note that you can submit questions to our speakers through the Q&A box in Zoom. We'll be monitoring that Q&A box, and we'll try and keep most till the end of the session, but if there's something relevant as the panelists are jumping in, we'll be sure to address it then. With that, again, I'd like to welcome you all to this CRAVE event, Shifting Mindsets and Learning a New Language in the Age of a Pandemic. This is a panel discussion facilitated by Caroline Alexander. Caroline joined the Allsteel team in the summer of 2012 as an architecture and design manager supporting the Northeast region. Now as strategic account manager, her role is to support large regional customers and their project partners with long-term individualized attention focused on streamlined buying processes and added accessibility to internal resources and development of furniture standards and strategies. Prior to joining the Allsteel team, she spent 5 years as a senior designer and architecture and design manager at an Allsteel dealership. Caroline graduated with a Bachelor of Science degree in Interior Design from Wentworth Institute of Technology in 2006. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Caroline to introduce the topic and our panelists for the day. Thank you.
Just want to do a sound check here.
Good.
All right, perfect. Steve, thank you so much for the warm introduction, and to everybody on the line today. Special thanks again to the sponsors and members and Debbie Crooks for getting this all situated. So today's conversation is really going to navigate around the reality of the evolving world. And this evolving world is filled with change. It's filled with pivoting practices and a new, carefully articulated language. So I am honored to be here with many of my colleagues as they share their stories with you. So to kick things off, I'm just going to introduce some of our panelists that we have. Mike Bonito is a VP of Sales and Branch Manager at WB Mason Company, based out of Cranston, Rhode Island. Mike, thank you for being here today. Next, we have Erik Johnson. Erik Johnson is a Senior Workplace Advisor working for Allsteel. He comes to you from Arizona today. Erik, nice to see you.
Hello.
And then we have John Slane. John is a Facilities Manager at Citizens Bank. He's been there for quite a while and comes to you today from the Johnston, Rhode Island campus. John, thanks for being here.
Oh, happy to be here. Thank you.
You got it. So to kick things off, I want to hear from a few of our panelists regarding your pre and post-COVID worlds. John, let's start with you. As a facilities manager, I'm sure you've come across your fair share of challenges through the years. Before March, what was your biggest hurdle in your career?
I'd have to say, biggest hurdle in my career prior to March of this year was what I refer to as the building startup process. As many Cornet members know, Citizens Bank built a large campus that we opened in August of 2018. Before we occupied the building, my team played a large role in the process of commissioning the space and initiating and executing contracts with service providers. Some of these contracts included landscaping, snow removal, janitorial, HVAC maintenance, elevators, and so on. Not to mention the amount of coordination that went into those contracts and setting up that workspace. We also worked in parallel with a team to populate the entire building with 3,000 colleagues. So that overall was definitely a large undertaking.
Yeah, no small hurdle at all. How did things change for you when COVID came on the scene?
Fair to say our day-to-day completely flipped upside down on its axis. The maintenance team here that we have on site is insourced folks that work directly for the bank, whose jobs typically include electrical work, refrigeration, maintenance, painting, and cleaning. And everyone dropped everything, it feels like, at the beginning of March and picked up pandemic PPE. Our role completely changed. We were a large cog in the wheel in terms of supporting the entire real estate portfolio of Citizens Bank with COVID-19 support and supplies, from mailing masks to 13,000 colleagues directly to their homes from our office here in Johnston, to turning our fitness center, which saw 300 colleagues a day go in and out of there and get a sweat in and work out. We completely ripped it apart with no one in the building and turned it into a warehouse for 6 to 8 months storage, supplies, and a bottling plant, as well as our own sanitizer supply line. It was a 100% sprint every day. We come in the office for the past 3 months, and we're continuing that sprint as we speak.
That's incredible. Looking back now at the situation that you and your teammates so expertly and willingly took under, especially with Citizens being essential business, do you think that prepared you for response and strategies with your colleagues and customers with this pandemic?
Caroline, I'd be lying to you if I said we were prepared. There's no one, I think anyone that says they're prepared would be kind of telling you a fib, because there is no way that you could have predicted what we were facing and what everyone out there is facing day to day, especially in our industry. I think it's hard to say. I give the team a lot of credit. They showed up every day to a building that was empty, and you know, when the building's empty, you tend to take your foot off the gas. We had no choice but to put it down even harder, work diligently to service our colleagues at their homes, you know, directly through FedEx packages getting dropped off at their doorstep with 2 masks per colleague, all throughout the country in different regions. Change is hard. Our team powered through like champs, and, you know, continuing to take it day by day.
And I think that's a great point, because, you know, as the title of this presentation and discussion calls out, is that there's a lot of shifting mindsets. And one of the things that I've noticed personally is that we sort of went from this world of, I know what to expect generally day to day, to more of a mission-driven approach, right? You need to, like, if you need to do something, you need to step up to the plate, you need to pivot, you got to get your feet on the ground, you got to get your story straight. And that's what we're all consumed with until that mission is completed, per se. So in that vein of conversation, how did your team adapt to active change, and how did you communicate this throughout the Citizens colleague network?
It was difficult to react to what we felt. It felt like weekly changes rolled out by governments at the state and local level. We had a dedicated task force that my team was simply a small part of, but a dedicated task force that would digest and discuss needs at the state level in each of our markets, as the bank is regional across the country. And as folks return to the office, our branches, we closed, you know, due to the pandemic at any given time, you know, 2% or less of branches across the footprint, which is a massive undertaking, being in the service industry and customer service business. As everyone knows, each state had different standards in terms of face covering, signage, PPE. This task force that we had would meet daily to recap the day, look ahead to tomorrow, and plan for the upcoming week. In some instances, by 8 a.m. that next morning, when we had the plan all laid out that prior afternoon, the plans we had set in place would change. And the fact that this team's been together, you know, the facilities team here in Johnson's been together for almost 2 years as a cohesive unit. That cohesion really helped us, you know, read, react, regroup, and execute, you know, day to day. And that's really the only way you can really take this is day by day.
I agree. So if we're looking for a model of agility, people should reach out to you and ask you how you got through it. And I think, you know, when you think about, I think especially when you're talking about, you know, different governments in different states and adjusting your strategy to what those local governments were expecting, you know, that's a lot more than a lot of other people have to think through. So definitely cheers to you and your team. I know I've seen on social media quite a bit of outreach from the colleagues in Citizens Bank saying how appreciative they've been of how your organization responded to all this. So thank you for everything you're doing. Wanted to roll, Mike, I know you've been with WB Mason for a long time. Wondering, before March of this year, what was your most challenging experience professionally?
Yeah, you know, I always think in the singular as far as an event that reminds me of sort of the state of the climate right now. And I always think back to 9/11 for some reason. I was training a team out in Connecticut when it all happened, and we basically got the phone call, you know, to just go home. And you know, that ride home was one that I'd never forget, with all the anxiety and angst. Not only how it would impact business, but just in the world. That was such an isolated event now in retrospect. When you look at, you know, I think we're near 3 months into this. And I think John said it best, you know, your foot's on the gas every single day. So there's nothing that has compared to this in my career, and recognizing John's, John was probably the best trained for something like this, given the fact that the undertaking required to get Johnston up and running was massive. So he I'm sure is hitting it out of the park right now with his team and his staff.
Mm-hmm. So how did things change for you personally as a manager and inside WB Mason when March hit, right? We're talking about pivoting. A lot of what's going on right now is really a phrase which seems a little bit sharp, but it's adapt or die right now, right? So tell us a little bit about how WB Mason pivoted and what that looked like internally and with some of your suppliers.
Sure. So I would say this. I would say that I've been in an industry that's been, I would say the office supply industry itself has been threatened this past decade. It's a declining industry. So I will say the company has prided itself on being nimble and being able to pivot and sort of reinvent itself on the fly out of really necessity, survival. And we've actually thrived in that type of an arena. And so I think from that standpoint, we're pretty well prepared. But to John's point, you couldn't prepare for the, really the magnitude. I mean, it was like a switch went off. Businesses overnight closed. And if you're a company that's in the market of servicing businesses, that's a scary proposition. So I think for us, I'll remember the phone call. The owner of the company had a team call, and he said, "We have a plan, and we're going to execute that plan." And within days, we basically reshifted all of our energies and our efforts to PPE, as John had mentioned. And PPE really became the focal point. The challenge, I would say, is setting up a supply chain. In a grueling environment where we're trying to provide products that every business needs, the same handful of items. And that continues to be a real challenge because never has it been so important to the client to come through. So all of the efforts that John and his team put forth to prepare their staff, it relied on product. So high level of pressure, I would say, to produce and be able to deliver on those promises. From a supply chain, risky proposition, new partners with very little, history, making decisions on the fly, competing naturally against not only other resellers, but governments who are holding back product, FEMA. So it was a challenge. Marketing and merchandising had to quickly update the website and basically, start to re-market the company as a PPE provider. The sales team needed to become well-versed in the products. So it was a massive undertaking, but we did it quickly. And I would say we're flourishing, but it's foot's on the gas. It is go, go, go. Yeah, I would say too,
Mm-hmm.
There's been so many changes in what we've seen on the contract furniture side, that the interesting thing to note there is that, again, there's been so many industry trends that change. And so, again, our team from that standpoint is sort of accustomed to this. I'd say Johnson is a perfect example where, hotel-based solutions, collaboration spaces, and now suddenly, companies like Citizens has to reevaluate how those spaces are still utilized and maximized.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I know it's very interesting. Obviously, our two organizations work very closely together. And one of the things that I found really just refreshing was that as you guys started to experience new suppliers for all of this immediate PPE information that you guys had, you approached our leadership in turn as well and said, some of these, categories of whether they be foot poles or sanitizer holders or, whatever it might be, right? Screens, you guys approached us and said, we need to find a way to really level out and be able to predict for our customers what the lead times are, what the prices will be, and we're sure we can get them to you. And so it's been pretty awesome to see how that relationship from a manufacturing standpoint has been able to bring these products to market to help offset what you guys are offering through other vendors as well, right?
No question. And what I would say to that is a lot of our vendor partners are accustomed to how quickly we do change. And so they're used to the demands that we put upon them as sort of, a liaison for our clientele. And now it's about businesses being able to reopen and follow new procedures, state by state. And we certainly don't want to delay that from happening. So we rely on companies like yourself to produce solutions and deliver solutions quickly. This pandemic has never magnified, the need to act quickly and produce results quickly. I mean, lead times have never become more important, whether it be contract furniture or disposable masks and gloves and gowns and thermometers, right?
Yep, people and businesses are depending on that.
Yeah, they're required.
And no matter what stage you are in returning, or if you have been returned and now needs are changing, there needs to be that back-end response to support any and everyone. So very, very good points. Thank you. And, I think one of the major themes in all this is just that this proverbial Band-Aid that was ripped off overnight is going to continue to evolve, right? That Band-Aid is going to get stripped off several times as we adjust to new change. And clearly change is a very difficult thing for most people, but the pace of change and how often everybody is being forced to remain agile and, this sort of idea of expecting change, you just don't know when, a lot of gray area. So those of us who like that black and white, not such a cool place to be right now. But Erik, I'm going to ask you to come on now and talk a little bit. Now, we work very closely together. You service a lot of our customers here in New England. Your team has spent a lot of time on the road traditionally. You're focused on change management, remote work, which are both extremely relevant right now. But how are you talking to customers about change at the speed of this pandemic and learning the new proverbial workplace language?
Yeah, thank you. Well, as everybody has emphasized already, this has happened overnight. As I talk about it, overnight, organizations had a virtual workforce. Boom, and that was it, and you had to deal with it. And talking to organizations about how they can support that virtual workforce, a lot of it has been more looking in the rearview mirror and saying, what can we do now that this has taken place and we have to work with this? And that's a very different place for people to be sitting in from a leadership perspective and from a management perspective. And both John and Mike have illustrated how, from an organizational standpoint, they have responded to that. And picking up on what they said, when I'm talking to clients today, there are 2 points that we are bringing to the conversation, and they can seem sort of like dichotomies in a way. I mean, the first is this need to be agile and flexible. As I think John said, we start off one day with a plan, and by the next morning we have to adapt it because something else has come forward, and we need to rethink that. So keeping that ability to be adaptable in place is core to everything that organizations are doing and how they need to share that information with their internal customers. The other side of it is the safety component that people need to be thinking about, which is, unlike safety in the workplace has been before, which has been sort of a general sense of safety, now it is a very personal thing. Will I be safe in the workplace, or will I be safe at home? And each of us are in a very different situation. So having to talk about, quickly changing what's going on while also being able to respond to what Erik needs to make sure that I'm safe so I can focus on my work are two very different ways to think about communicating and talking to people. And I think about the change that's going on, and we've been said, it's really fluid. The difference is it's not a babbling brook, it's a frickin' waterfall.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. If I were to ask you, your top 3 must-have inclusions that are a vital piece of success for change management or a new way of work or revised procedural practices, sort of what would they be?
Well, like any effort to help organizations and their employees go through change, there are 3 key components that you have to think about. The why is the change happening? What is the benefit to me and to the company? And then how are we going to get there? What are we going to do? And like any workplace change, the why here is, why are we planning to come back to the office? 90 days ago, we were told to go home because it wasn't safe. Now you're telling me to come back, and I have to commute, and I have to come into an office where there are going to be people there. Why are we doing that? And so you have to explain that rationale. Why, when I come back in, can't I sit in every desk? What is the rationale for that? What's the purpose of that? And then again, what are the benefits to me? Well, we're doing this so that you're safe. We're creating these policies and procedures that you're safe. But we're also doing this so that, in the case of citizens, so that citizens can continue to be the successful financial institution it is and provide the customer service that they are known for providing. So it's both of it. And then how are we going to get there? What are you going to tell me? When am I going to know? What's the schedule? But more importantly, how can I give you feedback if I don't understand something or it's not quite working? And how are you going to acknowledge my feedback and let me know what's being done with it? And this goes back to that safety issue. You may be putting in place all these cleaning protocols, but if you don't continually show to me that they're happening, I may not be comfortable with that. And so it's this ongoing process, which all change management is, but it's happening much more quickly than most organizations are typically used to having to put in place.
Absolutely. And I think, as people generally, our behaviors are really driven around me first and then everybody else. So,
right.
Speaking to how are you taking care of me, having that open thread of conversation, knowing that, this isn't something bogus that leadership is throwing out there that everybody kind of has to get on board with, right? This is something very real. As you stated, the personal piece of this is so widely different as well for how we each perceive the world and how we perceive communication. And, for everybody out there who's anything like a mama bear in situations, how are you going to keep me safe? How will you keep my family safe? And how do we continue business and being successful as we make all these adjustments?
Yeah, and we're going to have some tough conversations. One of the basic ones is if you're working in the office and somebody gets a little too close, how do you tactfully turn to them and say, back off, which is not a really polite way to do that. And that's a place where organizations can have a little bit fun with that, something that is culturally appropriate. In Phoenix, I've heard people talking about turning to a colleague and saying, rattlesnake. Because we all know walking on a trail, if you see a rattlesnake, you back off. And so that's a little creepy to me, but in this world, it works. In Boston, that people would look at you like you're crazy if you said that, but you figure out what works for your company and for your location.
Absolutely. And thank you for sharing that story, because I think that largely, and depending upon how each of us feel individually, what experiences we've had since all this. I mentioned earlier sort of this mission effect, like I'm only leaving my home if I have a specific mission I need to either complete my job, take care of my family, take care of myself, or keep my family, my close family safe. So, in doing that, speaking back to this sort of shift and change and how we're all adapting to new practices, I think about some of the missions I've gone on, and it ranges from just simply going to the grocery store. And I can't help but draw a parallel to how consumer behavior has changed how the workplace functions, and how consumer behavior now really impacts us personally on considering how we're going to add this extra level of work and practice back into our daily lives. So, if you've gone to the grocery store and you've got aisle markers in one-way directions, the varying people who are attending those stores, and there are recommendations for what you should be doing when you attend, but if there are recommendations and you're not required, you can't turn people away, then how do you approach people who aren't practicing those or are heading down the aisle the wrong way, right? I never thought I'd be telling a poultry story on a call like this, but it's Thursday. I'm doing my one shop a week. I'm going to the supermarket. We're going to grill wings. We're going to have some cold beers. And here I come down the right way down an aisle, and there's someone parked at the poultry section, right? And now I can only buy one thing of poultry. And this person standing there isn't wearing a mask and has no idea that I'm even waiting because I'm beyond 6 feet, because I'm trying to be patient, right? Of this shopper continuing to buy, her food for her family and then wait to go. And then, you kind of get stuck in this place emotionally and maybe fueled by a little bit of anxiety about how do I say something to this person that's not going to offend them or shock them or scare them because they don't see me in their peripheral, right? And it's, having those conversations, or, excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm waiting for the chicken, right? And then hopefully you have a polite reply and we can all get our shopping done and resume to the weekend. But then you think about, okay, in each phase of opening, there are potentially, new things that we're going to have to experience. You're going to go to outdoor dining. People take off their masks. You are not 6 feet apart from somebody. How does that feel? And so I guess, that sort of leads into this conversation of, how do we, again, adapting how we work business-wise, but adapting how we manage our language and our communication skills, especially, I can tell you personally, I didn't realize how important visual connection was with someone's mouth before that mouth was taken away by a mask, right? So understanding sensitivities of different ranges of people are going to get pretty tricky. And so I'm wondering to hear from the panel right now is what new languages are your organizations or colleagues going to have to learn to get through all this change in the workplace? Erik, do you want to start?
Well, as I mentioned, we're going to be having some difficult conversations. One of them is, you mentioned, where people are walking. How do you communicate that to people? I've got some visual images here, and about where do people sit. But then a little bit more difficult is how do we, from a workplace standpoint, how do we get our workers to understand what the flexibility is that's been put in place and how they can adapt to it to move forward? How do we share that information in a way that is relevant and usable to our employees? And then the other piece of it is, and this isn't part of the physical workplace so much, but how do we have conversations with employees that are appropriate? But when we're asking about, okay, is there anybody at home that you need to be thinking about relative to safety? Are you taking care of your parents who are, both in their 90s, and we really need to think about that? That's typically not information we're sharing, but we need to have a way to share that so we can say, if it's my situation, okay, Erik, then maybe for now it might be a good idea for you to think more about working from home so we don't put your family at risk. Now let's talk about how we can make sure you can communicate effectively with your team so that you're still engaged and part of the community, but we need to understand that piece of safety for you.
Mm-hmm. And I've heard a lot in the past couple of months the importance of checking in on people and not checking up on people.
Yes.
So that's in that same vein of, that personal touch of, individual managers to individual teammates, and then reporting back up to the organization to get everything on track is ultimately very, very important, a crucial
Yes.
piece of things.
Yes.
Thank you. And John, how about at Citizens?
Well, personally, physical awareness and respect for others has never been more important. I am a self-proclaimed big handshake guy. That is not happening anymore. Meeting with folks, meeting with vendors, things like that. The handshake was a great way to communicate, and eliminating that habit has been challenging, for me personally. But as a corporation, really that new language and reminding ourselves that people are dealing with this pandemic in different ways. They deal with stress and they cope in creating their own normal and their own new normal in different ways. Work is different, life is different, habits are different and changing, and we're all in this together and powering through. But couldn't agree with you more, Caroline, on it's not, for me personally, it's not me checking up on necessarily the work or the quality of work at this point in the pandemic for my maintenance team. It's that time that you have to personally connect with individuals. It's how are you doing today? Where are you at? And we're in this together. Anything we can do to help each other is really what we're creating and what our new normal is here. And to be honest with you, I can't wait to watch live sports again, and I'm sure other people can't wait to play in live sports and play in a pickup basketball game or things like that. So the ways that folks were able to relieve stresses outside of work previously, they're changing and consistently evolving.
I agree, and I love, the notion of acceptance and kindness and empathy towards other people really couldn't be more timely. And I think that it's a great lesson, I think, for all of us to consider where other people are at and how we're moving each other forward together. Mike, is there anything, I think, from a WB Mason standpoint, either trends of, products or supply or contract furniture that you can really speak to in terms of this new language in the workplace?
Yeah, and I would say this too. I think this is just the beginning of it evolving. No different than your experience at the retail store, and how do you handle that situation? Every situation is going to be probably a little bit unique, and we're all going to learn as we go until we can actually stabilize. I don't want to say policies, but standard operating procedures, if you will, as to how to handle a different situation. Erik, I think his slide says it all. It's, for us, a big part of PPE has become signage and decals and providing, people a visual and some clear direction. So if nothing else, you can refer to the sign. Maybe the woman in front of you at the, in line for chicken, if there were proper signage, maybe she would have been more cognizant, who knows? But, I think that's a big part of PPE. There's some great signage about obviously sanitation, social distancing. Even on the masks, there's been a huge demand for disposable and cotton masks. And we're now starting to receive in. We're well stocked now in items like children's masks. So again, when this all first happened, people weren't considering the size of the mask. It was one size fits all. Well, that doesn't work. And so we're seeing children's masks. We're seeing clear view masks. So that again, that language, being able to see someone speak is critical. So products like that have become, readily available now, thankfully. Obviously in the world of, furniture, there's been a huge demand for screens, acrylic, shields, And that's enabling coworkers to still be able to sit in the same pod, but with some level of, safety. To Erik's point, people need to feel safe, and those barriers are a key element to that in the workplace. And we're also seeing a lot of products shift to hands-free. Whether it be a door pull, a foot pull, whether it be, again, on the dispensers, electric dispensers and such. There's a whole array of new products that have launched, thankfully due to ingenuity, and, to help people feel safe and operate safely in facilities.
And, it's kind of a funny, not funny, but I draw such a likeness, right? Like I live and breathe in a world of furniture, right? So someone calls and they say, "Hey, Caroline, I need a lounge chair." And my string of questions to understand which lounge chair is best may drastically change which product I recommend and which ones I don't even propose, because it's clearly not for the activity being formed. It's clearly not within a budget range that they're looking for, right? So it's the same needs evaluation per se that you're going through in all your PPE conversations, as we would apply, every single day to a setting in the workplace where you're looking at, creating something specifically for an activity in mind. And
you touched, I thought you were going to go there. You were heading in this direction. I thought was just even the upholstery you're now using, right? Is how are you going to cover that piece of furniture? And 3 months ago, someone would probably would just stick with a standard grade fabric, and now you point out the benefits naturally of something that may be antimicrobial, and you take them down that path, and suddenly, yeah, let's go with that. So
right, highly cleanable, that whole thing. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And I know we are at 12:44, so this is perfect. We're hoping to wrap up panel discussion by 12:45 and then open up the forum for some questions. So gentlemen, thank you so much for all of your insights as we went through these topics. And please, if you're in attendee mode, if there were questions that came in, which I believe I can check, but Steve, if you're on and you can assist with that, I would gladly accept your assistance. We'll answer those questions that have come in, and then open up, I think, unmute your phones as you speak for the panel to share. So thank you.
Yeah, we do have one question here from Seth. While a sense of urgency and a mission-driven mindset are not necessarily easy, in the short term, it's the only option to get through. I'm interested in the group's thoughts on how these translate into a sustainable, long-term way of working.
Well, I'll jump in real quickly. An underlying statement I would make is, and this is something that, like when we're working with John and Mike on ideas, is whatever you're doing today, make sure that it is flexible so you don't box yourself into a corner as we learn more and more about this COVID situation and what comes next. And we don't know what comes next. So that sense of adaptability and flexibility gives us a way to do that. It may be more applicable if you're starting a new project, or more easily applicable if you're starting a new project as opposed to retrofitting something that's already there. But there are ways to bring that flexibility in. The other thing, and I think this is related to your question, one thing that we are all pretty sure is going to happen is distributed work is going to be a part of the equation moving forward for just about every company. Yes, there are some types of businesses, like if you're a federal government contractor or a defense contractor, your employees will be coming to the office because they have to, because of security requirements or things like that. But we have learned literally overnight that employees can work in a more distributed way. That's happening, but now what organizations need to do is understand what is working about that situation and what may be presenting challenges, and then how do we support that moving forward, making sure that remote employees are as engaged as employees that may be coming into the office. What does distributed work mean? A lot of organizations think of it as a binary solution. You're either working at home or you're not. And it is not a binary solution. It is a range of solutions. And that impacts what types of spaces you provide in the office and the flexibility of those spaces, and how those spaces are used, which gets into what Mike and John are thinking about and working on. Then it also gets into what is at home. And I know a lot of organizations are thinking about if we have a significant portion of our population now working remotely more, if ergonomics has been a big factor for us as a company culturally, how do we make sure it's working for our employees in a home setting? And you know, there are ways to make that work. A simple way, I was working with a customer who had 2,000 task chairs they needed to deal with, 1,000 of which were going to be taken out as they did this interim checkerboard planning. And they, as they understandably said, we're not going to be storing 1,000 chairs. That just isn't going to work. So what they did was they turned to their employees and said, you need a task chair at home? Here, take it. And they said, this is our way to deal with this. And it sort of supports two things: ergonomics in the home setting, that's important, but we also have solved a physical problem. We've got all these chairs. So that again goes back to that idea of being agile in the way you're thinking. That's not normally what an organization would do, but we got to deal with these 1,000 chairs. Let's make them useful, but get them off site.
And in a personal mission related, like, this is what I need to do today, this is what I need to get done, I do think there's again, we're talking about a large spectrum of people and tasks and personal situations. Is like, if I'm mission driven because it, you know, my business, my family, my welfare depend on it, right? I think there's that opposite side where it's like, if that's the behavior I'm taking just strictly to mind my own, right? Then there needs to be that other side where it's like very forgiving, and it's okay to do this, and you need to take time to recharge. And, you know, if you were in the office and you would have gotten up 3 times to get a coffee or walk a block away or walk to a meeting or have lunch with colleagues, right? Like, that part of the day was probably a key piece in helping us all perform the way that we were performing before, whether it be personal interaction or, you know, downtime to refuel so that you could put everything else back into work, right? So, you know, personally, I know it's easier or harder for some people to sort of manage that swing, but that's sort of how I would look at that piece as well.
Yeah, it's recreating your work setting at home and not just the physical setting. As you said, if I get up to get coffee at work, I can get up to get coffee at home. That's an okay thing to do. And sometimes we don't realize that making those little translations can be a way of help managing stress.
We do have another question. Can each of the panelists speak to their company's return to work policies and procedures? And if employees have begun to return already, has the return been as expected?
I'll step in. Most of our employees are in Iowa, which is where we're headquartered. We have begun the return process. It started, I think, last week, if I'm getting my schedules right. It is a staged process where we're treating the first group back as a pilot. We put in procedures around temperature checks and where you enter the building and how you move through the building and how you use the pantry and how you use conference rooms and things like that. We're testing to make sure those processes are working on this smaller group of people. We are finding some things need to be tweaked as we're getting into this. one of the bigger things is getting people to recognize that even though we put coffee machines around the floor, the one in the pantry is the nicest coffee machine, I think, and having 12 people stand in line because of the good coffee, that's not what we wanted. So they're rethinking how that works and things like that. So it's, and I don't think we plan to be back, assuming everything relative to COVID continues as we hope it does. We don't expect to have our employees back, those who will be coming back, until after the end of the summer. That's the general timeline that we're taking. It is possible that will be extended out further.
I can jump in just from the standpoint, we do cover multiple states, so every state has a different return to work sort of policy, if you will. So we're trying to adhere by the state's regulations on a case-by-case basis. Here in Rhode Island, there's a control plan that you need to basically be able to check off. We've done certain protocol changes. Again, a lot has to do with the social distancing. Try to transition some of those things like something as simple as coffee, for example. The shared coffee pot, may be a thing of the past, right? The 1-cup solution may now, gain more traction. So we're just looking at the space, trying to figure out exactly how it needs to be modified to ensure social distancing. Currently, the staff we haven't closed because we've been considered essential. The real impact has been on our outside sales force, which makes up a good number of a head count. And so for now, we're still conducting, our meetings, our weekly meetings are still being done remotely, and they're allowed into the building. But again, we're trying to stay within the percentages required by the state. So it's gradual.
Here at Citizens Bank, we're actually at the end of our 3rd week in terms of our initial phases of return to the workplace. We returned on June 8th, and as expected, the turnout was not what we were hoping for. And we actually our day one of return to work, June 8th, we had a representative who was on the governor of Rhode Island's COVID-19 task force show up and knock on our front door here in Johnston, flash his inspection badge, and proceeded to do a 12-point inspection on how we were prepared for COVID. Did we have signage on our front doors that the state of Rhode Island mandated for businesses? Did we have a company disclaimer regarding wearing a mask beyond the threshold? And happy to report, and couldn't have done it without our task force and everyone pulling the rope in the same direction, but we passed 12 out of 12 with flying colors. So much so that, here yesterday, we even had the governor of Rhode Island stop by to see what we're doing here and trying to set the trends for larger corporations in the state of Rhode Island. So it's been encouraging to see. Would love to see some more bodies in here, but it's been encouraging.
I don't see any other questions in the queue. So just a reminder, if you do have a question for the panelists, you can click on the Q&A box and enter your question in there, and then I or Caroline can read it to the panelists.
Thank you, Steve. I will add too, from, Erik gave that perspective from what we're doing at our headquarters, the showroom. So our local team here in Boston sort of use our showroom as home base quite a bit. And we're open by appointment only. So, we're discouraging drop-ins, because if no one's dropping in, luckily we have in-building mail, someone to receive our packages. But if no one's coming in, we're not expected to be here unless we need something in the facility. We do have a certain head count that we are required to abide by here in the showroom. So new practices with, I think, internal communication, shared calendars for saying, hey, I'm going to be in the showroom. Who else is going to be in? Who's bringing in customers? If we have customers there, we really want to encourage only the attendee who's facilitating the customer visit be in person, so that we free up some of that comfort level. And then we've also procured some great services through our partners here for virtual showroom tours, and then we're free also to sort of video and personalized video sharings from the showroom to our customers.
Great. Well, we have just a couple minutes left. I just wanted to thank our panelists, Erik, Mike, and John. Thank you so much for your perspective, and Caroline for facilitating this great discussion. I know we're competing with some pretty spectacular weather, but a good turnout and great insights. I also just again want to thank all of our sponsors for making these CRAVE events possible. But with that, if there are any other questions, feel free to enter them into the chat box. Otherwise, I think we can wrap up. I don't see any other questions. So thank you again, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.